By 1900, Los Angeles was no longer a dusty pueblo on the edge of civilization. Within the first decade of the 20th century, its population had more than tripled. LA was an emerging world-class city, and many of the pioneers who set it on that course had become some of its wealthiest citizens. Most of them advertised their success by building extravagant homes to live in, and when the time came, they also built equally grand accommodations to die in. To do that, there really was only one address worthy of their esteem. Come walk with me as I seek out some of LA's pioneers resting at Evergreen Cemetery. The best place to begin our walk is with the most conspicuous monument in the cemetery. This massive obelisk belongs to two men named Isaac, whose 60,000-acre wheat farm in a valley north of downtown LA would one day become home to 2 million people. And all who live and work in the San Fernando Valley are familiar with the names Lancashire and Van Nuys that appear on street signs, schools, and entire neighborhoods. Another of their lasting but little-known legacies is the wagon trail they established to transport their wheat and livestock to the port in LA. It still exists to this day, only commuters know it as the 405 freeway. It's been widened a bit since horse and buggy days, but the time it takes to get through the Sepulveda Pass hasn't improved much. Throughout his entire life, John Edward Hollenbeck was constantly on the move. Originally a merchant from Ohio, he settled in Nicaragua where he owned and operated a hotel and was an engineer on a steamboat. He also controlled a trading company that imported goods from Europe. Prior to leaving Nicaragua, he was made their ambassador to the United States. Early in the 1870s, he and his wife Elizabeth settled in Los Angeles and quickly set to work buying land for farming. Until the time of his death, he worked tirelessly, expanding his interests into banking and business development. John Edward Hollenbeck is another pioneer whose name has become a part of the urban landscape. New Jersey-born Nathan Russell Vail came to Los Angeles at a time when land was cheap and plentiful. Vail was already a successful cattleman and mine owner when he, along with his partners, purchased 1,400 acres of land in what is now Redondo Beach. A long stretch of the land was on cliffs overlooking the ocean. It was there that the partners planned to build a hotel. In early 1888, Vail wanted to see the future site of his hotel from a ship at anchor off the coast. Despite warnings, he boarded a flat-bottomed skiff with 3 sailors and entered the heavy surf. The boat passed 3 breakers and was about 100 yards offshore when a large wave capsized the vessel. Several efforts were made to rescue him, but by the time he was brought to shore, it was too late. He died never seeing his last business venture come to pass. William Hayes Perry was a woodworker by trade. In the 1850s, he worked his way west across the plains by driving sheep and cattle. By the time he reached Los Angeles, all he had to his name was the tattered clothing on his back. But by falling back on his skills as a woodworker, he made an adequate living. It was a time of tremendous growth in LA, and there was a demand for lumber. In 1873, he took advantage of the opportunities in the young city and closed his furniture shop and went into the wholesale lumber and lumber manufacturing business. His success allowed him to venture into other areas like public utilities like gas, water, and eventually the oil business. He also had time to establish a few banks along the way. One of them, the Farmers and Merchants Bank of Los Angeles, is still in business today. One of LA's most inspiring pioneers is also its most unlikely, and not so because of who they were, but because of the era in which they lived. The early history of Biddy Mason is a bit unclear, but there is no mistaking that she was born a slave in Georgia, and that sometime around her 18th birthday she was given to a Mr. Robert Marion Smith as a wedding present. In the 1840s, Smith became a Mormon convert and moved his family and slaves to Utah. Soon after settling in Salt Lake City, he learned that Brigham Young was establishing a new settlement in Southern California in a place called San Bernardino. And once again he uprooted his family and slaves for the move west. What Smith didn't know, or perhaps didn't care about, was that California had been admitted to the Union as a free state, and to cross within its borders with slaves was a violation of the law. But he would find out soon enough. Once he became known to the authorities, an effort was made to free all those he held in bondage, including Biddy Mason. Her freedom was finally granted in 1856. Now free, Biddy Mason quickly found work as a nurse, and with the money she saved purchased a plot of land in Los Angeles, becoming the first black woman to do so. As the years passed, she sold her property at a profit and purchased more until she became a very wealthy woman. But rather than build a palace on Bunker Hill, she gave generously back to her community by helping anyone in need. She donated land and funded the construction of First African Methodist Episcopal Church, LA's first all-black church. When Biddy Mason passed away on January 15, 1891, she was laid to rest at Evergreen Cemetery in an unmarked grave. It wasn't until March 27, 1988, that this marker was placed here in a ceremony attended by Tom Bradley, Los Angeles' first black mayor. Every grave, great or small, tells a tale of tragedy and loss. Which brings us to the story of the LA pioneer who built this fine tomb. For a while it seemed that he had everything a person could possibly want, until he lost the woman he loved. On the night of January 30th, 1906, a special train entered Central Station in Los Angeles. It had barely come to a complete stop before its only passenger, Mr. Charles Canfield, disembarked and sped away in a waiting automobile. 3 days earlier, while on a business trip in Tampico, Mexico, he had received word that his beloved wife had been gravely injured by a madman on the front porch of their Westlake mansion. What Mr. Canfield didn't know, and what his family wanted to spare him until the last possible minute, was that his wife was already dead. Charles Canfield was a well-known oil tycoon and the business partner of Edward L. Doheny. Together they had sunk the first oil wells in Southern California. By then he was already married to the beautiful Chloe, who was 12 years his junior, and while he ran his oil business, she raised their 4 children and ran the household. She also hired and supervised the family's domestic help. Sometime around 1901, she brought a man named Morris Buck into service as the family coachman. But he was quickly dismissed for the neglect and cruel treatment of the Canfield's horses. After Buck's dismissal, the family believed they had seen the last of him. No one could have predicted the bloody turn of events that was to come. Sometime late in 1905, Buck mailed a letter to the Canfield's home asking to borrow $2,600. Not wishing to bother her husband with it, Chloe personally sent a reply refusing his request. But rather than moving on and seeking credit elsewhere, Morris Buck became more aggressive, until eventually he showed up at the Canfield's front door on the night of January 27, 1906. By then the housing staff had grown fearful of the young man who they described in the parlance of the day as a dope fiend. So it was Chloe who answered the door and invited Morris Buck to sit on the porch to talk. When he made another request for money, she politely refused, at which time Buck became enraged. Getting to his feet, he produced a revolver and fired 2 bullets into Chloe's chest. The assailant fled on foot to the boathouse at Westlake Park that has since been renamed MacArthur Park. That is where he was captured a short time later. In the meantime, neighbors carried the mortally wounded Chloe Canfield to her bedroom. As she slipped away, she pitifully murmured, "Give me air. I can't get air." Devastated and enraged, Charles Canfield vowed to see Morris Buck hang, even if it, quote, cost him $1 million. And he meant every word. Through his influence, he persuaded Earl Rogers, LA's leading defense attorney, to switch roles and serve as prosecutor, and he hired former California Governor Henry Gage to aid his cause. About the only thing the defense could do was try to spare Buck's life by claiming that he was insane. In the end, he was convicted and sentenced to hang. His execution was carried out on December 6, 1907, at San Quentin Prison, after which his body was buried in the prison cemetery under a wooden marker. Charles Canfield got the vengeance he wanted, but it did little to ease the pain of his loss. His old friend and business partner E.L. Doheny noticed that he was never the same. Having lost interest in business, Canfield spent the few remaining years he had left secluded in deep mourning. He joined his wife in death on August 15, 1913. Some of the pioneers who molded LA into a modern metropolis were only passing through. After making his mark in Northern California, Levi Newton Breed came to Los Angeles in 1881 with his mind set on retirement. However, he was not the type to sit idle while the wheels of progress were in motion. He invested heavily in real estate and made a fortune. He was the president of a couple of banks, and he eventually drifted into politics. In 1885, the same year he was elected to the LA Common Council, tragedy struck. Levi's 22-year-old son Fred was traveling with a friend from New Mexico to Arizona when the passenger train he was on collided with a freight train outside of Santa Fe. Fred was killed instantly. Devastated by his son's loss, Levi had his body brought back to LA for burial at Evergreen, where he put up this elegant monument, complete with a description of the tragic circumstances of Fred's untimely passing. It might have been Levi's intention to spend the remainder of his days in LA and then take his place beside his son in the grave. But Levi, the ambitious wanderlust who made his home in hotels, eventually moved on, leaving his only son to sleep beside strangers. The Bixbys have an extensive family plot at Evergreen Cemetery. They came to Los Angeles and began acquiring real estate in Rancho Los Palos Verdes, where they grazed their cattle. Their land acquisitions increased after cousins Jotham and John combined their holdings in Cerritos and Los Alamitos. In the 1890s, Jotham Bixby was styled as the father of Long Beach. He helped found the city's first national bank and served as its president. He also drifted into the role of public servant. As the 20th century dawned, he began selling his extensive farm and grazing lands, and in their place new towns and communities began to spring up. Bitten by the gold bug, Cameron Erskine Tom made the long journey to California from Culpeper County, Virginia in 1849. He only enjoyed a modest success in the gold fields, but it was enough to launch him into a career in the law. Tom was already a successful lawyer and public servant in Los Angeles when the Civil War broke out in 1861. Although he was a Californian by choice, at heart he was a loyal Virginian. So he returned to Culpeper County and served as a captain in the state militia. At war's end, he came back to California to resume his old life. However, a state law had been enacted that prohibited Confederate sympathizers from practicing the law or holding public office. But Tom had many friends who successfully petitioned his pardon to President Andrew Johnson. In the years that followed, Tom served as Los Angeles' 16th mayor, and he would become one of the founders of the city of Glendale. In death, however, he wanted to be remembered for just one thing. And nothing says you're a man like a 35-foot obelisk. Edward Fallis Spence was born in Ireland and devoted his life to public service. Settling in Northern California first, he was elected to the state assembly and was also the treasurer of Nevada County. Once in Los Angeles, he followed the same career model of other pioneers of his day. He purchased land and found his way onto the boards of several banks. Then it was on to the city council and eventually mayor of LA. In his last year in office, he got financing to install the city's first electrified rail car. He was also one of the founders of the University of Southern California. This monument belongs to the Woodworth family, and it marks the resting place of Mercedes Lugo de Foster, the wife of LA's first mayor, Stephen Clark Foster. When she died in 1913, the great-great-grandmother was heralded as the city's oldest resident at 105 years. However, her headstone gives her age as 110. Another man who made a fortune in real estate was German-born John Hauerwas. He was also a partner and co-founder of the Adloff and Hauerwas Brewery. By the time of his premature death in 1906, he was a member of several fraternal orders, including the Freemasons and Oddfellows. But if we are to learn anything about him from his impressive headstone, it is that he was most proud of his accomplishments as a target shooter and huntsman. Émile Vacher and his brother came to Southern California from France and established Brookside Vineyard that is still owned and operated by his descendants to this day. If you've lived in Southern California long enough, then it's almost a given that you've patronized one of this man's department stores. Dry goods store proprietor Joseph Winchester Robinson left Massachusetts for California with the idea to develop orange groves. However, when he arrived in Los Angeles, he found a burgeoning city in need of a high-end dry goods store with customer satisfaction as its foundation. A year later, the Boston Dry Goods Store opened on Spring and Temple Streets and offered Angelenos their first taste of East Coast refinement. It was an immediate success, and within a few short years they moved to a larger location. The store's success seemed endless, but J.W. Robinson would not enjoy it for long. In 1891, he passed away suddenly at the young age of 45. But the company did not perish with him. After the funeral, Robinson's father stayed in California and took up his son's business, renaming it J.W. Robinson's Company. Robinson's department store would survive for 100 years before being bought by the May Company, and then again by Macy's. Though the name is no longer a part of the retail landscape, its customers first philosophy is still a keystone to the retailers that have carried on in its place. Another business pioneer in Los Angeles' early retail history is Norwegian-born Hans Jevne, who founded one of the city's first modern grocery stores. To find another giant in the grocery business, you only need to walk a few steps away from Jevne's grave. With more than 200 stores in operation, Ralph's is probably one of the best-known grocery chains in Southern California, and it's for sure the oldest still in business. George A. Ralph's opened his first store in 1873. By 1914, George was partners with his brother Walter, and they had 4 successful markets in the LA area. 1914 would also be the same year that his fate would take a tragic turn. While on a hike near Arrowhead Lake, George broke from the trail to take a short rest on a large boulder. As he sat, the rock beneath him gave way and rolled down a steep slope, taking Ralph's with it. Rescued from the canyon, he was brought to a hospital in the town of Ramona, where his shattered leg had to be amputated. Sadly, it was too much too late for the businessman, who passed away an hour later. Like J.W. Robinson, Ralph's didn't live long enough to see the great successes that his company would later enjoy. But he lives on in name for the millions of customers who shop Ralph's supermarket every day. So far, we've visited the pioneers of business and politics, but there are also pioneers of the mind here as well. Like Indiana-born Sarah Butler, a barber's daughter who came to Los Angeles sometime around 1930. Within a few years, she was founder and bishop of the Zion Temple Community Church that for a while had LA's fastest growing congregation. Her ministry success made her a popular speaker at churches across the country. Sadly, like many we have visited today, Sarah's life and work was cut tragically short at the age of 37 when the treasurer of her church entered her office and for reasons unknown took her life and then his own. Her funeral attracted upwards of 7,000 mourners, and though she left this world before her time, her ministry on Vernon Avenue still serves the community. In this part of the cemetery is Eddie Anderson, better known as Radio and Television's Rochester, the sharp-witted manservant of the miserly, if somewhat far-sighted, Jack Benny.
Rochester, are you sure the eggs are in the refrigerator?
Yeah, you'll find them on the top shelf.
Oh, yeah. Well, they couldn't have been in here very long. One of the eggs is still warm.
Put on your glasses, you got the light bulb.
Eddie now rests beside his first wife, Mamie. He leaves behind a brilliant show business legacy that was an inspiration to generations of aspiring African-American comedians.
Oh, by the way, Rochester, while you're selling the sandwich, give them a sort of a floor show. You know what I mean? Sing and dance or something, and that way we can get the cover charge, too, you know, for the...
Roast beef, ham, cheese, Mr. Ben's special noodle soup. Oh, we ain't got a bell of money. Maybe ragged and funny, but we're traveling along, singing along, side to side. Oh, we don't know what's coming tomorrow. May it be trouble and sorrow, but we'll travel around, sharing a load, side to side.
The pioneers' mansions that once sat upon Bunker Hill like jewels on a Fabergé egg have all been swept away by progress. Even the accomplishments of those who lived here have also slipped from memory. And one day it will come to pass that the wind and rain will even erase their names that have been engraved on these magnificent stones. Time can be a cruel companion, but as long as we continue to build, civilization will go on, as will the spirits of the old pioneers and the ones not yet born. If there is anything to take away from their stories, it is to live, love, build together, and always, always strive for a better tomorrow. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe today to see the third and final chapter of my exploration of Evergreen Cemetery.